High above California's desert, a young pilot faces death. His fighter plane has gone into an uncontrollable spin. The wings shake violently. The ground and sky switch places over and over again. He has only seconds to live, unless he can figure out what to do right now. This happened in February 1943, and it changed how pilots survive for generations to come. At Muro Dry Lake in the Mojave Desert, rows of P-38 Lightning fighters sat baking in the intense heat. These planes looked completely different from anything else in the military at that time. They had two engines sitting far apart on long booms, with the cockpit positioned in the middle section between them. The twin engines and sleek, unusual design made them fast and powerful. Lockheed built them to be the best interceptor fighter in the entire sky. But pilots kept dying in them. Month after month, more training accidents happened. The Lightning would suddenly go into a spin without any warning whatsoever. When it started spinning, the regular tricks that all pilots learned didn't work at all. Pulling back on the control stick and pushing the opposite foot pedal, the method that had been taught to every cadet since World War I, made things worse, not better. In many cases, the plane spun faster instead of stopping. Some pilots reported that their attempts to correct the spin actually made it accelerate. Officers told young pilots something that sounded harsh but made sense given the circumstances. If you spin for more than 2 complete rotations, you must jump out with your parachute immediately. A parachute landing, even if rough, beats crashing into the desert at full speed. Most pilots wouldn't survive a crash at those speeds. The Lightning's design created a very serious problem that engineers were still trying to understand. The two engines sat so far apart on their individual booms that they created uneven forces during a spin. The airplane's center of weight was positioned between the two booms, which was far from where the tail controls were located. When the plane spun, one boom would go up while the other went down. The plane didn't spin like normal fighters. Instead, it tumbled in a chaotic, violent way that regular pilots couldn't control. The rudder pedal lost its power to affect the plane's direction. The elevator controls stopped working properly. Doing what the manual said to do, using opposite rudder and pushing the stick forward, sometimes made the spin worse instead of better, flipping the plane into a deadly flat spin from which there was no way out. Lockheed's engineers definitely knew about this serious problem. They had warned pilots about it in official guidance. Avoid hard turns at low speed below 10,000 feet. Never pull more than 4 G-forces below 250 miles per hour. If you start spinning, cut both engines to idle immediately and deploy flaps if you have enough altitude left. If you don't recover in 3 seconds, bail out right away. The engineers were honest about their limitations. They didn't fully understand why the twin booms caused this deadly problem. They just knew from real accidents that it happened over and over again. Ralph Hofer was born in Salem, Missouri in 1924, growing up on a working farm. He came from a family where fixing things was not just a hobby, it was survival itself. By the age of 9, Ralph could already rebuild tractor engines by himself. By 14 years old, he could listen to an engine running and know exactly what was wrong with it just from the sound it made. His father taught him that every single problem had a solution if you truly understood how things worked at their core. Ralph had a natural love for mathematics and physics in school. He wasn't the type of student to memorize formulas by rote. Instead, he understood why they worked and what they meant. When a neighbor's truck suddenly lost its brakes completely, Ralph rigged up a temporary fix using nothing but a bicycle pump and copper tubing. He created a backup hydraulic system. The temporary fix worked and got the truck home safely. When Pearl Harbor was attacked by Japan in 1941, Ralph enlisted in the military at 17 years old, even though he was technically underage. He wanted to be a pilot, not because he dreamed of glory or excitement, but because he genuinely wanted to understand how flight actually worked from the inside. In flight school, Ralph was very different from most other cadets. While other students just learned what the instructors taught them and moved on, Ralph studied everything deeply. He sketched detailed diagrams of how wings worked and how air pressure moved around them. He walked the flight line every morning before dawn, asking the mechanics all kinds of questions about how engines worked, how turbochargers operated, and how fuel systems were designed. Most pilots treated the mechanics as hired help or stagehands. Ralph understood something crucial that many pilots didn't. Mechanics knew more about how planes actually worked than any pilot ever would. Ralph turned out to be a natural flyer. He moved the controls of the plane smoothly and carefully. He could feel how the plane responded through the vibrations and sounds it made. He flew with intuition, but his intuition was grounded in mechanical logic and understanding. When instructors taught him formation flying, he could hold his position without drifting. During aerobatics training, he managed the plane's energy with real precision, converting altitude into speed and back again without wasting momentum. When instructors finally taught him about the P-38, Ralph studied it the same way he once studied tractor engines back home. He wanted to understand every single system, every quirk, every unusual behavior. He would arrive early at the flight line and watch the mechanics service the Allison engines. He'd ask detailed questions about how the turbochargers operated, how coolant flowed through the engines, and how the magneto timing worked. The crew chiefs liked him because he actually listened and cared about their answers. He understood that these mechanics understood the airplane in ways that pilots never could. Ralph flew his first P-38 sortie on a cold January morning. The takeoff run felt eternal to him. The nose of the plane stayed high, blocking his forward visibility until the tricycle landing gear finally lifted off the ground. Then the desert dropped away beneath him, and the two Allison engines sang together in harmony. Ralph could feel how stiff and rigid the airframe was, the way it resisted roll inputs when flying at low speed. He felt the slight yaw that happened when he throttled up just one engine. He internalized all this feedback, building a complete mental map in his mind of how the Lightning responded to control inputs across its entire flight envelope. But no one had ever taught him what to do when that envelope collapsed completely. No training covered what to do when the normal rules stopped working. The problem wasn't new to the engineers, it was structural and built into the design itself. The P-38's twin-boom design created aerodynamic asymmetry that amplified any pilot mistakes. In a single-engine fighter, a spin is violent but predictable and understood. The aircraft rotates around a vertical axis with the nose down and one wing stalled. Recovery is taught in every pilot's first training. You reduce power, neutralize the ailerons, apply opposite rudder to stop the rotation, push the stick forward to break the stall, wait for airspeed to increase, and then level out. It's a standard procedure that works on conventional fighters. But the P-38 defied this standard logic completely. Its center of gravity sat between two engines far from the central fuselage where the cockpit was. In a spin, one boom would rise while the other fell, creating a tumbling motion that resisted all conventional control inputs. The rudder lost its authority as the airflow separated around it. The elevators, which were mounted on the central fuselage, were shielded by the spinning airframe itself. Standard recovery technique, opposite rudder and forward stick, sometimes made it worse instead of better. Pilots would add full opposite rudder, and the aircraft would transition into an inverted flat spin. An inverted flat spin was unrecoverable. It was fatal. Lockheed's engineers knew about it from wind tunnel tests and from analyzing accident reports. They issued handling guidance to all pilots. Avoid low-speed maneuvering below 10,000 feet. Never pull more than 4 Gs below 250 indicated airspeed. If a spin develops, immediately reduce power to both engines to idle and deploy flaps if altitude permits. If recovery doesn't begin within 3 seconds of starting these procedures, bail out immediately. The engineers were being completely honest about their limitations. They didn't fully understand the spin dynamics themselves. Wind tunnel data suggested that the twin booms created a vortex interaction, a swirling pattern of air that locked the aircraft into rotation. The only real solution they could recommend was don't spin it in the first place. But combat doesn't allow that luxury. Over New Guinea and North Africa, P-38 pilots tangled with Japanese Zeros and German Messerschmitts in turning fights. The Lightning had speed and firepower advantages, but it couldn't turn with a Zero in a dogfight. Pilots who tried to turn tightly, who hauled back hard on the stick at low airspeed to get their guns on target, often entered spins. Some managed to recover somehow, but many didn't. After-action reports mentioned it cautiously and carefully. Aircraft lost during combat maneuvering. Cause undetermined. Witnesses often reported seeing the P-38 tumbling and spinning, then a streamer of smoke with no parachute visible. Training commands circulated the warnings everywhere. Spin avoidance became strict doctrine. Instructors drilled it into every cadet repeatedly. Do not exceed the lightning's turn envelope. Do not yank and bank at low airspeed. If you find yourself in a spin, bail out immediately. The aircraft is expendable. You are not. It was sound advice backed up by dozens of fatal accidents. But it also meant the P-38 couldn't be flown to its theoretical limits. Its turn performance was constrained by fear as much as physics. Some cadets ignored the warnings anyway, young men who believed their skill could overcome bad design. A few tried to fight their way out of spins using brute force, full aileron against the rotation and full throttle on one engine to create asymmetric thrust. These improvised techniques occasionally worked, but more often they didn't. Crash investigators found wreckage scattered across square miles of desert. The impact force was so great that identifying the bodies required dental records. Ralph Hofer read all the incident reports carefully. He saw the pattern. Spins happened during aggressive turns, usually in the training area during mock dogfights. Pilots pulled hard, lost airspeed, stalled one wing. The aircraft snapped inverted and began tumbling. Most bailed out immediately, which was the safe thing to do. But Ralph noticed something unusual in the survival accounts, in the statements from pilots who somehow recovered. The few pilots who recovered described doing nothing. They stopped fighting the controls. They waited. And sometimes, not every time, but sometimes, the lightning sorted itself out and recovered. Ralph filed that detail away in his mind. He didn't talk about it. He just remembered it. It happened on a Tuesday morning. The sky was clear, and there was only light chop in the air, mild turbulence. Ralph was flying solo doing aerobatics at 18,000 feet. His mission profile called for loops, rolls, and Immelman turns, standard aerobatic maneuvers. He was practicing energy management, trading speed for altitude and back again, learning to feel the edge of the envelope without crossing over it into danger territory. He entered a slow roll at 250 knots, a controlled, smooth rotation of the aircraft. He applied aileron smoothly and carefully. The horizon rotated. He held the roll, flying completely inverted, watching the Mojave Desert spin below him. Then the airspeed bled off faster than he expected. The nose dropped downward. He corrected with back pressure on the stick, but he pulled too hard. The wing stalled. The P-38 snapped left violently. The world tumbled chaotically. Instrument panel. Sky. Desert. Sky. Over and over. The spin developed instantly. Ralph felt the sickening rotation, the G-forces, the gravitational forces, shoving him sideways in the harness, pressing him against the side of the seat. His inner ear screamed. Every instinct told him to fight. He instinctively jammed the right rudder pedal all the way forward. Nothing happened. The spin accelerated and got worse. The altimeter unwound rapidly. 17,000 feet. 16,000. 15,000. Doctrine and training said bail out now. Ralph's hand moved toward the canopy release handle. Then he stopped. He thought about the survival reports again. The pilots who did nothing. He released the yoke completely. Neutral stick, neutral rudder, both throttles pulled to idle. The lightning continued spinning. 15,000 feet, 14,000. The desert filled his entire vision. He forced himself to wait, even though every nerve screamed at him to do something. The spin felt eternal. His stomach knotted. Sweat soaked his collar despite the extreme cold at that altitude. Then he felt it, a slight change in the rotation. The nose dipped lower. The spin slowed down. Not stopped, slowed. Ralph didn't move. He let the aircraft fall freely. 13,000 feet. The spin transitioned from a flat spin to a nose-down spiral. Airspeed began building rapidly. The rudder regained its authority and effectiveness. Ralph applied gentle opposite rudder carefully. The rotation stopped completely. He eased back on the yoke, the horizon leveled. He was flying again. His hands shook. His breathing came fast and hard. He checked his altitude, 11,000 feet. He'd lost 7,000 feet during the spin and recovery. If he'd been lower when the spin started, he'd be dead right now. But he wasn't. He'd recovered. Not by fighting harder, not by doing more. By waiting. By doing nothing. Ralph leveled off and circled for a moment. His pulse slowed down gradually. His mind shifted from pure survival instinct to analytical thinking. He replayed the entire sequence in his mind, frame by frame. The stall, the snap, the initial acceleration of the spin when he added rudder, then the stabilization when he released the controls, the slow transition to a nose-down attitude as the aircraft found its natural falling posture, the return of airflow over the control surfaces. He saw it now. Fighting the spin disrupted the airflow further. Doing nothing allowed the aircraft to fall into a configuration where the controls worked again. He didn't report it immediately. He wanted to be absolutely sure. Doctrine was doctrine for a very good reason. One successful recovery could be luck. So he climbed back to altitude and did it again deliberately. He stalled the aircraft and kicked rudder to enter a spin again. Neutral controls. Idle throttles. Wait. The spin developed. He fell through the air. 15 seconds. 20 seconds. Then the nose dropped. Airspeed built. Rudder authority returned. He recovered again, successfully. Ralph landed and sat in the cockpit for a long moment, thinking. Crew chiefs approached asking if everything was okay. He nodded. He signed off the aircraft and walked to the operations building. He didn't mention the spins. Not yet. He needed to understand why it worked before he told anyone about it. Over the next 2 weeks, Ralph tested his theory over and over again. Whenever he flew solo, he varied altitude, airspeed, and spin entry technique. He entered spins from slow rolls, from snap turns, from accelerated stalls. Every single time he followed the same procedure: release the controls, let the aircraft fall, wait for the aerodynamic transition, then recover gently. It worked every single time. The recovery altitude varied between flights. Sometimes he lost 3,000 feet, sometimes 6, but the lightning always came out successfully. He began to see the logic clearly. The P-38's twin-boom design made it aerodynamically unstable in a spin, but that instability was actually the key to survival. The aircraft didn't want to spin. It wanted to fall nose down, with the engines pointing forward into clean airflow. Fighting the spin with opposite rudder or asymmetric thrust disrupted the transition. The controls themselves were actually the problem. Neutralizing them allowed the airframe's natural tendency to reassert itself. It was completely counterintuitive. Every instinct said fight, but the solution was surrender. Ralph also discovered something else valuable. In the moments before recovery, the P-38 rotated slowly enough that he could control the exit heading. A slight nudge of rudder, just as airspeed built, would swing the nose left or right. He practiced it repeatedly. Enter a spin, wait for the transition, nudge the rudder, exit 90 degrees off the entry heading, then 180 degrees. He was using the spin as a tactical maneuver, a way to drop rapidly and change direction, potentially useful in combat to evade enemy fighters. He mentioned it casually to another cadet during a flight line conversation. The cadet looked at him like he'd gone mad. "You're deliberately spinning a P-38?" Ralph shrugged. "I'm recovering from spins. There's a difference." The cadet walked away shaking his head, but a crew chief overheard the conversation. The crew chief told an instructor. The instructor summoned Ralph for a meeting. The meeting was tense and serious. The instructor was a captain with combat flying time in North Africa. He listened without interrupting as Ralph explained the technique. Neutral controls, idle power, wait for the nose to drop, recover gently. The captain frowned deeply. That contradicts every single spin recovery procedure in the manual. Ralph nodded. "I know, but it works." The captain asked if Ralph had documented any of this. Ralph shook his head. "I've been testing it. I wanted to be sure before I said anything." The captain told him to stop immediately. Deliberate spins violated training protocols and safety rules. If Ralph wanted to pursue this further, he needed to go through proper channels, write a formal report, submit it to the chief flight instructor, and let the test pilots evaluate it officially. Ralph agreed, but he didn't stop flying and he didn't stop testing. He wrote the report over 3 nights, working carefully. He included entry conditions, spin characteristics, recovery procedures, and precise altitude loss data. He drew detailed diagrams showing control inputs and aircraft attitude throughout the entire sequence. He noted that neutral controls allowed the P-38 to transition from a flat spin to a nose-down spiral, restoring airflow over the rudder and elevator. He calculated average recovery altitudes and suggested a minimum safe altitude of 8,000 feet above ground level for attempting the technique. He kept the tone factual, clinical, no drama whatsoever, just observations and data. The chief flight instructor read it carefully, then forwarded it to Lockheed's test pilot liaison at Muro. The test pilot was a civilian named Milo Burcham. Burcham asked to meet Ralph privately. They sat in a briefing room with the report between them on the table. Burcham asked Ralph to walk him through the procedure step by step, from beginning to end. Ralph did so precisely. Burcham asked about variations, different spin directions, inverted entries, engine-out scenarios. Ralph answered each question with specificity and detail. Burcham sat back in his chair. "You've been doing this solo at altitude without any chase plane or safety observer?" Ralph nodded. "Yes, sir." Burcham didn't smile at all. "You're either very brave or very stupid. Maybe both. But if you're right, this could save lives. That's important." Burcham arranged a formal demonstration flight. Ralph would fly with an experienced test pilot in chase at altitude over the dry lake bed. If Ralph's technique worked, they'd document it officially. If it failed, the chase pilot would confirm when Ralph bailed out. Ralph agreed to the flight. The flight was scheduled for March 9th. The morning came cold and clear with good visibility. Ralph pre-flighted the P-38 with extra care and attention. He checked control surface movement carefully, verified fuel loads, tested throttle response. Burcham briefed him on radio procedures and abort criteria. If anything felt wrong, bail out. Don't be a hero. Ralph nodded. He strapped in carefully. The 2 Allison engines coughed to life. He taxied out. The chase plane stayed close behind. They climbed slowly to 20,000 feet. Ralph radioed that he was beginning the test. Burcham acknowledged. Ralph reduced power, pulled back on the yoke. The Lightning stalled. He kicked left rudder. The spin began. The horizon spun once, yet twice. He released all controls. Idle throttles. He fell through the sky. The spin continued. 10 seconds. 15 seconds. His heartbeat thudded in his ears. Then the nose dropped. Airflow returned. He added gentle opposite rudder. The spin stopped. He recovered level. Burcham's voice crackled over the radio. "Clean recovery again?" Ralph repeated it. Right-hand spin this time. Same procedure, same result. Then a third spin entering from inverted flight. Each time the P-38 recovered perfectly. Each time Burcham confirmed it over the radio. After the 5th spin, Burcham called it. "That's enough. Bring it home." Ralph descended with steady hands and a clear mind. He'd proven it beyond doubt. Lockheed issued a technical bulletin within 2 weeks. It didn't mention Ralph by name anywhere. It outlined a revised spin recovery procedure for the P-38. Neutralize all controls. Reduce throttles to idle. Allow the aircraft to transition to a nose-down attitude. Then apply gentle opposite rudder and ease out of the dive. Minimum recovery altitude, 8,000 feet above ground level. The bulletin went to every single P-38 unit in the Army Air Forces. Training commands updated their syllabi immediately. Spin recovery became part of advanced P-38 instruction. Cadets practiced it under strict supervision at altitude with chase planes standing by. Accident rates dropped noticeably, though not to zero. Spins still killed pilots who entered them too low or who panicked and fought the controls. But the survival rate improved measurably overall. Pilots who once would have bailed out now had a second option available to them. In combat theaters, the technique had a subtler but important impact on tactics. P-38 pilots began using intentional spins as evasive maneuvers in combat situations. When bounced by enemy fighters, they'd enter a deliberate spin, dropping several thousand feet in seconds while changing heading dramatically. Pursuing aircraft often overshot their target or lost sight completely in the confusion. Once clear of pursuit, the P-38 pilot recovered and egressed at low altitude. It wasn't a dogfighting tactic for offensive use. It was an escape maneuver, a way to evade. But it worked and saved lives. Ralph Hofer graduated flight training in April 1943. He deployed to England with the 8th Air Force assigned to the 4th Fighter Group. He flew P-47 Thunderbolts initially, then transitioned to P-51 Mustangs later. He became well known for aggressive flying and for pressing attacks when other pilots broke off and disengaged. His gun camera footage showed kills at ranges so close that debris from his targets struck his own aircraft. He was fearless, or perhaps he simply understood risk and probability differently than others. On July 2, 1944, Ralph Hofer was leading a flight near Oschersleben, Germany. His Mustang was hit by flak, anti-aircraft fire. Witnesses saw him attempt a forced landing. The aircraft crashed. He did not survive. He was only 20 years old. By that time, he'd been credited with 15 aerial victories officially, though some historians believe the true number was higher based on gun camera evidence. His name appears on the wall of the missing at the Netherlands American Cemetery. But his spin recovery technique outlived him. After the war, it was refined further and incorporated into jet fighter training programs. The principle, neutralizing controls to allow natural aerodynamic recovery, became foundational in spin instruction across all aircraft types. Test pilots at Edwards Air Force Base cited the P-38 procedure when developing recovery techniques for the F-86 Sabre and later the Century Series fighters. The logic Ralph discovered at 18 years old influenced flight training for generations to come. Crew chiefs at Muro kept a logbook of unusual fixes and field innovations. Ralph's name appears in one entry dated March 1943. Cadet Hofer demonstrated spin recovery procedure. Aircraft recovered without incident. Technique recommended for evaluation. It's only a single line, with no elaboration whatsoever, but it marks the exact moment when one pilot's curiosity and careful observation turned lethal instability into survivable aerodynamics. It marks the point where one person changed how an entire branch of the military trained its pilots. In 1952, the Air Force published a comprehensive study on fighter spin characteristics. The section on the P-38 included a footnote. It referenced a field procedure developed during wartime training, noting carefully that the technique contradicted conventional doctrine, but proved effective in practice. The footnote didn't name Ralph Hofer. By then, the institutional memory had faded away. The technique was simply part of the curriculum, its origin lost to bureaucracy and time and administrative processes. But the mechanics remembered. Old crew chiefs who had retired by the 1950s told stories at reunions and gatherings. They remembered the farm kid who asked too many questions, the cadet who walked the flight line at dawn, sketching diagrams, thinking through problems no one else wanted to touch. They remembered the day he proved that falling could be safer than fighting. They understood what he'd done. Aviation is built on moments exactly like this, not on grand theories or billion-dollar programs or politicians making speeches, but on individuals who notice what others miss, who question assumptions, who test ideas, who risk themselves to verify intuition. Ralph Hofer didn't invent aerodynamics. He didn't redesign the P-38. He didn't create new engines or new materials. He simply observed, experimented, and trusted logic over fear and instinct. He noticed patterns in accident reports. He thought about what survivors said. He tested a theory that seemed crazy. He proved it worked. He reported it through proper channels. And the institution listened. The P-38 went on to serve throughout the war and beyond. It escorted bombers over Europe. It hunted submarines in the Pacific. It shot down more Japanese aircraft than any other fighter in that entire theater, a record it held for the remainder of the war. Pilots loved it and cursed it in equal measure. It was fast, powerful, complex, and unforgiving. It demanded respect and skill. But after March 1943, it was a little less deadly to its own pilots, a little safer, because one farm boy from Missouri thought about the problem differently. There is a photograph of Ralph Hofer taken sometime in early 1944. He stands beside a P-51 Mustang, his parachute harness hanging loose around his shoulders, his face shadowed by the wing. He looks young, impossibly young to be a combat pilot, but his eyes are focused, measuring something beyond the camera's frame. He's thinking, always analyzing. He never wrote a memoir about his experiences. He left no letters philosophizing about courage or innovation or what it means to be a test pilot. He simply flew, tested, and moved on to the next problem that needed solving. His legacy is a procedure buried in training manuals and instruction books. It's a footnote in a technical study. It's a single line in a crew chief's logbook. And it's thousands of pilots who recovered from spins they once would not have survived otherwise. That's his real monument. In the end, Ralph Hofer's contribution wasn't a weapon or a tactic or a new technology. It was a gift of time, the seconds between panic and death, the altitude between instinct and impact. He showed that sometimes survival means letting go, that sometimes the answer isn't force but patience and waiting, that the sky forgives those who understand it deeply, even when it kills those who fight it stubbornly. The P-38. Lightning is gone now except in museums and air shows where enthusiasts can still see them. But the lesson remains fresh and important. Trust the physics. Wait for the transition. Let the aircraft tell you what it needs. And when the world spins out of control around you, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is nothing at all, until the moment when you can do something that matters.